History. History always is, at best, like this story, a chiaroscuro. The 23 Club by Edward Flaherty. Episode 2. It's 2 a.m. George Coymans wrote, "Somewhere in a lonely hotel room there's a guy starting to realize that eternal fate has turned its back on him." Part 1. Dubai Arrival. Long-distance international jet travel had never bothered Chalmers. He thought, I arrive, I go to work. When the day is finished, I go to bed. It works out, no problem normally. This time, it was different. Chalmers was awkwardly unsettled. He was on the 23rd floor in one of Dubai's ubiquitous five-star hotels along Jumeirah Beach Road in New Dubai. He was sleeping. At 2 a.m., he was awakened by what sounded like lots of heavy furniture being moved around on the floor immediately above. Big time. He called the front desk. They said they'd check. The incessant noise continued another 15 minutes. He called the front desk again. The noise continued. Half-hour later, it still continued. This time, he reached the duty manager at the front desk. By then it was 3 a.m., and the duty manager apologized that young members of the ruling family from another emirate had just moved in to party in the presidential suite. If he'd like, they could prepare another room for him. Right, Chalmers thought with a smile, a dose of Western cynicism and his innate pragmatism. He knew this drill. Foreign guest disturbed by young royalty. Foreign guest relocates. There was no other way if he wanted any more sleep. So he agreed, and they moved him far away, down at the other end of the hall, 2 floors lower. He grabbed his things, and after a certain amount of toing and froing with the hotel staff, at 4 a.m., he put his head down again. This time it was quiet, but he couldn't sleep. Part 2. Kismet. Chalmers was strangely ruffled. More than this last couple hours, it had been the last 24 hours that were now too vivid, almost visceral in his head. His thoughts drifted back. The blood in the streets. Jean-Claude. Bahrain. Ashura. His thoughts drifted back as he recalled, yesterday, about midday. On this trip to the UAE, he had to make an overnight stopover in Bahrain. He did not think much of it, an extra overnight. He had not checked the Hijra calendar. It was the Day of Ali. He had read about this special Shiite day, but he had never seen it and had no reason to think about it, until he was at the hotel breakfast buffet that morning and bumped into an old friend, Jean-Claude Thibaut, who on the way from Papua New Guinea coincidentally was also stopping over in Bahrain. Chalmers had met him nearly 20 years ago while they were both speakers at a national conference sponsored by the American Society of Landscape Architects. They shared an educational background in Brussels and a landscape fondness for the Alps, along with a fundamental agreement on the importance of integrating ethnobotanical cultural roots into contemporary landscape design. When Chalmers explained he was on the way to the UAE to fix a project in the empty quarter, Jean-Claude told him about related research he had done there in the past 5 years. For both, this was a welcome coincidence. Jean-Claude adjusted his schedule, and they agreed to meet up in the next week to visit the empty quarter together and compare notes. Jean-Claude Thibaut, a 49-year-old Belgian, was a confirmed bachelor, who found his pleasures in the hair-shirt explorations of cultures, of marginal groups just outside the edge of mainstream society, people still in contact with the land, with the old ways. Bedou, Berbers, Calusa fisherfolk descendants, true gypsies, etc. He examined human relationships with plants through landscape, language, music, life. He was a very broad-scale ethnobotanist. He did not write for publication, did not have a Ph.D., but he did maintain extensive multimedia digital archives, all collected firsthand. Stories, songs, movies, images, and plant-related artifacts, amulets, charms. Born into a wealthy, entrepreneurial Belgian family, he took birth in the Belgian Congo, where he spent the early years of his childhood. He was a polyglot graduate of international schools in Brussels and Gstaad. Following formal education at the University of London, he had traveled and visited all major botanical institutions in Africa and South America, gathering ethnobotanical information before his first post with the International Union of the Conservation of Nature. Ultimately, he became a director there. He had since retired to focus full-time on his personal research activities. At 5'11" and 165 pounds, he looked popularly slender and athletically lean. He had a self-effacing presence, and a manner of dress and hygiene uniquely making him as at home meeting and greeting in a 5-star Monte Carlo resort, as in a modulus tent on the edge of the empty quarter. He was not shy about sharing the realities of the groups he studied. Over the edge would be the polite way to describe his first-hand experience of the unusual interactions he shared regarding old, almost forgotten ways of human interaction with plants in the landscape. Part 3. Day of Ali. Jean-Claude mentioned the Day of Ali to Chalmers, and suggested they make a trip into town before noon to see, as he called it, the parade. Jean-Claude explained, Bahrain is a country whose population is dominated by Shia, who are ruled by a Sunni family. It is the only Arabian Peninsula country with those demographics. Today is Ashura, the Day of Ali, the Shia holiday commemorating the death of Ali, whom they believe should have carried on Islam after the Prophet Muhammad. For Muslims, Shia Muslims, it is the oldest case regarding a people being hard done by. The entire history of Shia versus Sunni friction comes from this one bifurcated route. Chalmers commented, Jean-Claude, I always appreciate your cultural interests. They give me broad insights from which to solve my specific site problems, but this time I think this is too far off my focus. What do you mean, Chalmers? This is an urban landscape issue par excellence. And Shia, you can't escape their presence and influence anywhere in this region. What do you say? Well, you've rarely done me wrong, Jean-Claude, so go ahead, tell me more, I'll listen, but I can't miss my Dubai flight this afternoon. We can go this morning, Chalmers, and you can still make your flight to Dubai this afternoon. Okay? Listen, let me tell you, in the Muharraq section of Manama, on this commemoration day, all the shops are closed, all the people stay inside, all windows and doors are shuttered for the Ashura parade. A parade, Chalmers said. I'm not really convinced. As you know, I'm an American, and parades to me include Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade in New York, the Tournament of Roses Parade on New Year's Day in Pasadena, and if there is an odd parade, it is the Mummers Parade in Philadelphia. Really, I don't want to get into this Ali thing. Can't we just watch it on TV or something? Jean-Claude ignored Chalmers' concerns, and after they finished breakfast emphasized, You've got to see this. It is a landscape event, both sensual and essential. And while I don't want to give you any more reason not to go, I must warn, and as you must know, this isn't a touristic event. Nobody else will be on the street. We will be careful because the people in the parade become entranced, and Kafirs, non-Muslims, are sometimes targeted with horrendous result. But we can do this. I know how. Jean-Claude looked with imploring eyes at Chalmers. Okay, Jean-Claude, but you've got to promise to get me to the airport on time for my departure this afternoon, okay? Don't worry, Chalmers. You can take your things and put them in the trunk of my rental car. Immediately afterwards, I'll drop you at the airport with plenty of time to spare. Part 4. Ashura Flashback. Jean-Claude, he knew the town. They parked the rental car a couple blocks away from the route and gradually worked their way closer through the Muharraq streets. Old, narrow, labyrinthine. The weather was overcast, without even the slightest breeze. Warm, humid, almost foggy. No shops were open. It all looked like an abandoned, almost derelict movie set. Nobody was out, except the two of them, in the gray, stifling, unkept atmosphere of the Muharraq Medina. Chalmers felt like he was being suffocated by the hot, heavy, thick, still air, rife with sickly Medina bacteria, rife with bacteria that had been breeding for centuries on these sunless streets, in the creeping mildew and mold on the filthy walls. Then he started to hear and smell simultaneously what he could not yet see. He heard the rhythmic chanting of men in numbers. Then he heard the rhythmic pounding, flesh on flesh, in unison, in numbers. Then he recognized a stank smell in the air. That ferric smell could be none other than fresh blood. Chalmers and Jean-Claude moved closer to the sounds. The smell became worse. They came to an acute corner, the chanting so loud that they could hear nothing else. They peered around the corner and saw their first group, maybe 30 to 40 guys, in the zone, glazed eyes, rhythmic chanting, marching, and with their fists pounding themselves on their chests, all in sync, driven, completely driven. Chalmers didn't know, driven by some strange force. All auras were disturbed, out of balance. Fear was palpable, personified, gripping. It flowed, it spread over Chalmers' body. In an attempt to calm himself, he tried to recall the Mevlana trance dancing he'd seen years ago in Istanbul and Konya. But what he was seeing now was without the refinement, without the subtle and elegant Mevlana dervish music and dance. This was brute force trance. The next group arrived. Some were bareback, some were black t-shirted. All were bloody, splattered everywhere, blood dripping down their backs and soaking their trousers. Their eyes were dazed, their eyes were tranced. Powerful chanting, pushy, aggressive marching, in coarse, raw, rhythmic sync. This group had more than fleshy fist thumping on chest. They had the mechanical flagellation kit, the Zangels. Some call these Zangels cat o' nine tails. Each man, and this was a men-only event, had 2 Zangels, each with steel grip, one firmly held in each hand. At the end of the grip were a number of chains, 6 to 9, maybe 30 to 40 centimeters long, with obviously sharp, piercing pieces attached to the ends. While grasping the Zangel steel grips, they vigorously thumped their chests with their fists, pounding first the right and then pounding the left, all in rhythm, all in sync, and with each thump the chains whipped over their shoulders. The sharp edges, the sharp tips ripped into their backs, already flailed with numerous, freshly flowing bloody cuts. These men were in another world. Well hidden, peering around the corner, Chalmers and Jean-Claude secretly watched them pass by. Then 2 or 3 more Zangel flagellating groups passed by in sequence, each with unique chants, each with unique marching steps, all soaked in blood from their freshly opened Zangel wounds. It was all too much. Chalmers was overwhelmed by the sickly smell, the sight, the whole oppressing aura. He had to leave. He had to get fresh air into his lungs. He pulled Jean-Claude by the arm, and they stealthily slipped away, back to their car. What had he seen? Muharraq, awash with the overwhelming letting of human blood. His stomach turned violently. Part 5. The Fixer. Chalmers now found it impossible to get back to sleep, with that smell of an old, suffocating city, saturated with fresh human blood, permeating his mind, his memories, and even, it still seemed, his very nostrils. In his Dubai hotel room, late that very same night, Chalmers had these images and fresh memories in his head. Back he was, in the Middle East, a place where the politically correct slogans of multiculturalism, so much a part of the Western world, especially the United States, were replaced by a real-time miasma of in-your-face cultural shocks. It's part of his work. Chalmers carried on, as always. He gave up trying to sleep. The Assura memories were just too strong. It was 5 a.m. He got up, showered, and ate breakfast at 6. Then he prepared for his first empty quarter project meeting. What did Chalmers really do as a fixer? He worked in a rarely defined but critical gap. The gap between the air-conditioned carpet world of the planners, of the designers, and the oppressive 50-degree centigrade sweaty world of the people who actually build those very large and complex, iconic projects in the oil-rich Middle East. The gold ring? Get them built and beautiful so that they can begin the return on investment on opening day as scheduled. His most noteworthy example of success being Atlantis the Palm Dubai, a 1,500-room resort destination and huge water park, with its A-level international celebrity, Hollywood to Bollywood, opening media event, all coming off as scheduled and profitable every month since. Chalmers' specialty was external finishes. These were the things of the first impression that must look good, the magnets that wow people from their first view and then on through the front door. The stuff has to be beautiful, fresh, healthy, seductive, and breathtaking. If it is not, then he won't work again. Some developers plan for this, others do not. For the developers who do not plan, it is a real-time anarchic mashup, rupturing cash and resources. And Chalmers, he gets called in at the last minute with panic all around. From his first Skype conversation with Toons van der Walt, Chalmers knew this empty quarter job would be one foo-bar mashup. And he knew every day on this project would be, as Cole Porter wrote, "The world has gone mad today, and good's bad today, and black's white today, and day's night today. And now, God knows, anything goes."